Awesome. Matias, Vikram, welcome. So excited to have you here. We start these conversations by just asking, could you tell us a little bit more about your journey to getting here?
Absolutely, Tai. Thank you very much for having us. So my name is Matias Madou. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Secure Code Warrior. And I actually started my career at Ghent University here in Belgium, where I pursued a PhD in application security. And with my PhD, I moved to the US. I joined a startup called Fortify. And that startup was really, really good in finding problems in code. So when a developer is coding, they were really good in finding problems in code. Well, I thought it was actually very easy to find problems in code if you never ever tell the developer how to code securely in the first place. So, with that knowledge, we jumped ship and we started a company called Secure Code Warrior. And our mission, our objective, what we really want to achieve is to help the developer in writing secure code by essentially doing the right things from the start so that they do not have the heat from the security people in their neck. Um, so here we are. We're 7 years into that journey. We grew like coal in the last couple of years, and we're extending in all sorts of ways, including partnerships. And maybe that's a perfect time to hand it off to Vikram.
Awesome. Thanks, Matias. Hi, everyone. My name is Vikram Ghosh. I'm the SVP of Strategic Alliances at Secure Code Warrior. I joined the company about a year ago. So you heard from Matias that we are a 7-year-old startup. I joined the company when it was a 6-year-old company. My background, I started off in product. I spent almost my entire adult life as a product manager. Then stints in business management, all kinds of stuff at Microsoft, including a stint in sales. And I got into partnerships almost by accident. This was the early days of cloud services, the one that starts with an A. And at that point in time, cloud services and partnerships did not go very well together. And my job was to go find out and figure out what partnerships meant in a world of cloud services. So that was my journey into partnerships, gosh, 10 years ago. The reason why Secure Code Warrior was super interesting and exciting for me was it brought into an interplay of developers, of application security, and this movement around DevSecOps. Often we say security should be shifted left. I thought Secure Code Warrior and what we were doing here started left when it came to security and developers. So that's a little bit about my journey.
Awesome. I love it. And so I'd love to hear from you, Matthias. Like, what was it that made you decide on the executive level that you needed a partnerships or alliance person?
Well, so back in the day, we had to figure out everything ourselves because if you can't do it yourself, well, nobody else is able to do it. So if you cannot sell your own solution, your own product, well, do not expect somebody else to be able to do so. So back in the day, we had to figure stuff out ourselves, and once we figure that out, we're able to train other people on how to sell that solution. But they also bring their experience, and they do better than us. So yes, we were able to sell the initial part of our solution, but with experience, they can actually sell better, sell more of our solution. And the same is true with partnerships. So once you establish that you're able to sell it yourself, that you're able to have a team around you that is able to sell the solution, well, then you can start to think about, well, can actually also our partners be involved? Can we do something with partners? Can they sell our solution? Or can we integrate with partners? There's actually different ways to work with partners, but it needs time. And I think a lot of beginner mistakes with organizations is like, hey, well, we cannot sell the solution, let's go to a partner and they will be able to sell the solution. That is not the truth. They will be able to do better. They know their job better than myself, for example, but we definitely need to first be able to sell it ourselves before we can involve partners. So I think sometime down the road, for us that is 5, 6, 7 years in, we thought it would be a good idea to work with partners.
Awesome. Awesome. And Vikram, can you tell us a little bit about the types of partners that you work with at the moment?
Awesome. And Tai, there are, uh, before I jump into the types of art partners, uh, I'd just like to reiterate a point that Matthias made a little while ago. Um, well, I look at my role in the company to serve three primary people. Matthias in the CTO organization and the product organization. I help them with partnerships where we cannot or will not build. So think of that as a function often called technical alliances or large cloud provider relationships. So people like AWS, GitHub, GitLab, all of that fall in that bucket. Uh, the second part of my job is to make sure that all the partnerships that we do, we're able to generate a bunch of what is often called market buzz. I call it awareness and perception. And in that capacity, I serve our CMO and that organization there in terms of establishing our brand, establishing a market presence, getting a lot of halo effect from all kinds of partnership. The third organization is the sales organization. Ultimately, all kinds of partnership should be revenue accretive. And that could mean accelerating deals in our pipeline, getting new opportunities into our pipeline. So, in terms of partnerships, I mentioned technical alliances and large hyperscalers. Systems integrators, people who bring solutions together, becomes extremely, extremely important in this fragmented space of application security and DevOps. That is almost as much a cultural transformation as it's about tools. So SIs become really critical in how they bring a solution together for end customers. And finally, we also work with a few resellers, people who help us transact our product, essentially because they remove friction from the deal. So those are the kinds of partnerships that we look to foster and grow.
Awesome. Yeah, love that. And I think everyone would be really interested to hear more about the technical alliances and especially that build by partner decision making and like how involved you are in that. You know, I've personally been in a few situations where I've worked at companies that we've decided to build competitive solutions to like great partners of ours, which is always tricky. You know, especially when it's like in those cases, unfortunately, they were tools that ended up not being anywhere near as good as the partner solution, and also not adopted by our customer base either. So we really just like kind of burned ourselves in the market. But I would love to hear like how you go through that decision making framework, Matthias, and how involved is the kind of partner component of that in that picture?
So we're in an interesting space where we have a lot of friends, meaning there's a lot of solutions out there that we're complementary with. Um, and I have to admit, we did look at other companies and figure out, well, would that be a good buy? Like, would we be able to buy a small company that has a little bit of revenue and grow that business? Ultimately, we decided not to do that because we quickly realized that we would make the people that right now are helping us, they would become our enemies. And um, building that market is hard. So why try and burn bridges for some small portion of the revenue if you have a good relationship with multiple other organizations in that space that can actually help you and elevate you? So what we've done in that particular direction, we said no. So we're not going to go into that direction because that market is saturated. There's a lot of big players already in that market that help us, and we would make all of them our enemy by acquiring or building a small or tiny thing that may potentially be insignificant. That's one thing. So naturally, then we started to do more partnerships with them and do more integrations with them because we decided, like, well, we're not going to go into that particular market, but we want to strengthen that relationship with these bigger partners, and see what we can do. So we definitely focused on that. But then, of course, the next question is, what will you buy or build? You know, what is your direction? So for us, we have a certain direction that we're thinking of, where we will not make these big partners or competitors, but it's somewhat a new market, a new area, a new field that we want to conquer, which is very much in line with what we're doing right now.
Awesome. Awesome. And Vikram, is that, I mean, it sounds like that's kind of an ideal scenario for someone that's working on technical alliances. Could you tell, like, do you have advice for folks that are maybe have less of a positive relationship with the product team? Maybe they don't have as much visibility into the roadmap, or, like some of these competitive solutions come out of left field for them. Like, what's a good way to kind of build good connective tissue with the product org?
So I touched upon it a little while ago when I said I serve three masters in the company, and I ordered it as the CTO slash product organization. The first, it's really, really important for folks to understand the business strategy. It's less about partnerships, it's more around the business. And if you understand the business and you understand the capabilities of the business, you can be a party to that build, buy, or partner decision. Otherwise, you're going to be left with, hey, I want a partner, and that partnership could be extremely short in terms of time. We've done a bunch of bridging partnerships in the past where we needed something in the short term, but longer term, it was a build or buy strategy. But it's really, really important for the ecosystem's partnership person to be involved in that decision and understand the context. I don't think any one of us here are in an adversarial relationship. But if you understand the context of what your company is trying to do over the mid to long term, these moves become a lot easier and pleasant.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really tricky for people on the partner team is quite often you spend so much time outside of the building speaking to people in like complementary but kind of tangential industries, that you end up with like quite a broader picture of both the ecosystem and often like the customer workflow and like needs of the customer. And so like the reality that you're operating in can often be quite different to the reality that the company is operating in,
Correct.
which I think is a real challenge. And so, like, I'd love to hear one recommendations on how people can get up to speed on the business, like, and getting more in the building and understanding that. And then I'd love to hear from both of you on like, what's a good way to kind of bridge that gap between those two realities and like bring everyone along on the journey.
Go for it, Vikram.
I'll take that. So, in fact, to everybody on my team, the first point of reading that I send them on is market. What is the market that we play in? What are the adjacent markets that we participate in, either through our partnerships or through any kind of an alliance function? So, if you understand the market, you're also then able to empathize with the competitive challenges and the headwinds or tailwinds in that specific market. So, that's the first place. Second place is to look at what your quote unquote competitors and or partners and or cooperators are doing. And the best way to understand that is if it's a publicly traded company, you read up the 10K. In fact, my team often uh, gives me a hard time because my first conversation with them is, have you read the 10K? Have you read the 10Q? So understand uh, the ecosystem completely. If it's a private company, it's a little harder, but you can often read up a lot around fundraisers, where a company is saying they'll go, and all the other external factors that get into it. So that's the second part of understanding the broader market. Third point is to then think like a product manager and start with what is our challenges, what are our barriers of entry if we were to participate in that market. And that way, when you sit down with people like Matthias and our head of product, you're having a much more educated conversation than just, hey, I have this partner, they have some cool tech, we think we can do blah. So if you're bringing something to the table, and that bringing to the table is often market, industry, competitive landscape, and a cooperating landscape, and of course if you speak to customers and sales, if you can bring that to the table, that becomes a much better conversation than I just have a partner, I just want to do some partnership with them.
Yeah, I love that advice. And Matthias, just to kind of unpack it a little bit. So, like, say for instance, Vikram or someone on his team has spent a bunch of time with a partner that is tangential, but like has a unique perspective now on the market that maybe your team wouldn't have otherwise. Like you're super busy and like you have your roadmap and like I think sometimes getting this kind of feedback left field is tricky, right? And it can feel like it's distracting, or it's not like it's not in line with what you're trying to do. Like what's a good way for people to broach that conversation? Is it like getting a cadence of feedback? Is it like bringing it to you in a certain way? Is it like having you connect with the partners on an advisory board or something? Like how do you like to receive that information so that you have like the full perspective on what's going on in the ecosystem?
So, first of all, I think what Vikram is doing, they bring very interesting partners. The interesting part is, I quite often think I know all the companies in this space, and that turns out not to be true. Although I'm in that space for a long time, companies change so rapidly. There's these startups that grow as fast as they can, and then and older type of companies that are no longer a thing. So I always find it quite interesting that Vikram is able, and the teams are able to bring stuff to us that we're like, oh my god, we were not aware of that, and they're that big already. So that's the first point that I really like. Um, the way I like to see things is visual. I like to see demos and what needs it solves in our solution, or how we can actually partner, and how they can bring more business in terms of, hey, there's an integration with that partner to us. So I like to see the product itself. I really like to see a demo of the solution, so it's visual, so it's tangible. It's not a slide deck. It's not something static. It's not in words. It's really like, hey, I need direct integration feedback kind of points. Like, hey, we can do this here and this there. So that's how I like to work. Is that the best way? I don't know, but that's how I like to work, because I like action. I like to do something quite often too quickly. I want to jump in there and really do it, because I would love to see how these things can work together. So that's how I like to work. And to give an example, during the RSA conference, we had a couple of those companies. We sat down, we had an hour conversation with some demos, and that is sufficient for me to say yes or no. This would be a great partnership, or this would not be a great partnership.
That's awesome. Yeah, fun fact, the RSA conference in San Francisco in 2020 was like the last time that I was around like a large group of people. I'm excited to like get to another conference, but that was like literally I think this whole city shut down like a week after that, or like a few days
Correct.
after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so so I'll give you an example. So at Amplitude, for instance, we had a real focus on solving problems for product teams, right? It's like we want to help product teams build better products. And that came from really like behavioral analytics. And if you like unpack it a little bit more, really being able to build and cluster cohorts of users based on behaviors. And so that was like a real focus for the team. And it was great that we had that zoomed in focus. And then like our team would go out and we'd work with a company like Segment, for instance, or a company like Braze, where Segment is a CDP. You're accumulating all of that event data and structuring it so you can send it to something like Amplitude. And then like Braze is something where it's marketing automation platform, and you're taking those cohorts that you've identified in Amplitude and you're sending them out there, so you can send them push notifications, and you can send them emails and drip campaigns and all of this good stuff. And so like the workflow, and before that Snowflake, before it gets to Segment. And so we're operating at the partnership level like on a workflow that like the product team just weren't seeing. And over time we really made an effort to like kind of provide more perspective of that broader workflow, rather than just identify something interesting in Amplitude, build a cohort around it, share that chart with the team. It was like, hey, this is like the full life cycle of what happens with a user. And like, I think we, at least while I was there, we never really cracked like bringing that workflow back to the team. I think over time, everyone like nowadays Amplitude's like totally up to speed on that stuff, but it took like 4 years longer than I would have liked. I think I was probably too impatient. I mean, like, what tips would you have for me if I was back at Amplitude now and like the product team is focused on this and I thought that they should be thinking about more of it, and maybe I was wrong. Like, what would be a smart way to approach that conversation so that they didn't feel like I was distracting them from their vision, and I didn't feel like we were missing out on actually the problem that needed to be solved for customers.
Can I take this, and Matthias, feel free to
Absolutely.
jump in. Uh, the line that I use here, Tai, is everybody wants to learn, nobody wants to be taught. So if you just share, people are curious by nature. They love to hear about what's going on in not just their environment, but the environment around them. So, specific example going back to your time probably at Amplitude and what you were trying to do with Snowflake. Snowflake, really hot startup, largest IPO ever. Bunch of interesting things on how Snowflake did business, right? And if you start there, just from an education perspective, get people along on the journey, and then draw out synergies or potential synergies so that a light bulb goes off in people's heads. That's the tricky part of these relationships. It's not to cook food and put it in front of that person or that group. It's often to give them enough interesting tidbits and help them come to the realization of a potential synergy. And also be very humble in the process. Look, there might or might not be something here. We're often generalists in the partnership profession. And people who've grown up in the product pipe and the technology pipe are deep in that space, right? So if you approach this from a perspective of learning and a journey, you're often more successful than not. And remember that not all of the ideas that you have will be viable. A lot of times they might be viable over a period of time. I used to work for a gentleman who would often say, you know what, it's a great idea, but let's put it in the marination bucket. And there's a lot of factors that go into this. So you should be prepared that your hit rate in terms of the ideas and the potential synergies that you bring to the table, actually turning into something real, might not be super high. But also go in with an open mind around what can you learn in the process. And if you do that, the journey is a lot more interesting and exciting for both the parties.
I absolutely love that. And I was going to ask Matthias if you've got does that ring true? Are there things in particular that have like been helpful for you? Like, can you think of times where maybe Vikram's done that and it's been helpful, or like also are there other pointers and tips that you'd have for me as I go through that process again?
So Vikram is right on the money. The thing is, we all have IDs, a lot of IDs, and we have a very limited budget, especially in startups, and it needs to be very focused on what we need to deliver for our customers. Um, there's always too many IDs for sure. What I like is rapid iteration cycles where we build something super small, we try something out, and we try to get feedback as fast and as soon as possible to see if it's a viable thing or not. And if it is, well, then we keep going. If it's not, you you kill it as fast as possible and move on to something else. I know it's hard, but we all like our IDs, and but we should not be married to our IDs. We just should figure out, is it worth pursuing or not, and we need to do that as fast as possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, talking a little bit more about that, I'd love to hear how you two kind of prioritize the efforts that you're spending time on together. So, like, how do you decide? Okay, this is a integration that we want to build, or a partner that we want to work with. What's that framework look like?
Can I start?
Go for it.
Awesome. So, three things. Firstly, where's the market? Where's the market going? So I follow this line in my head, skate to where the puck is going to be. And I'm using a hockey analogy here. So for folks who follow hockey, that might ring true. So think about where the market will go. So that's point one. Second is think about needs of your customers that you can meet today. And the third one is look at capabilities that you have, capabilities and capacity that you have within the organization, specifically in the engineering and product world. If you apply these three lenses on any potential area that you want to build, buy, or partner, that decision around build, buy, or partner becomes very, very straightforward and clear. So that's the approach that I take to look at ideas and how we iterate through these ideas or triage through these ideas.
And I would say actually number one and number two is totally up to Vikram. He and the partnership team, they come with the market size and all of that good stuff. And the third bucket is what really interests myself, to be honest, from a product perspective. How will this work? Is it doable? Can we do something similar ourselves? Is there another solution out there? Maybe open source, probably not. But you know what I mean. We look into the more of the technical capabilities we have internally, the product capabilities that we have internally, and how we can actually work together, or how we can stitch those things together, or build it ourselves if it's trivial, which it never is, by the way.
Yeah. So true. And so like what tell me a little bit about how you like share goals across your teams, because I imagine that like great collaboration comes from being aligned both on the process and prioritization and also on like the outcomes you're trying to drive. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that as well.
Sure. So maybe to start at the top level, I think it's important that everybody in the entire management team rallies around the same goals and objectives. So from a super high level, we actually sit together on a quarterly basis in person. Well, not during the pandemic, but normally in person. Um, and we discuss what we want to achieve from a business perspective. So we always have to start from the highest level possible, so that we know what we want to achieve from a business perspective. And that then trickles down. Then that trickles down towards product engineering, but also partnerships and alliances. And from that moment on, it is still, I think, a discussion with the entire management team what the objective is. Of course, with the proposals and input from Vikram, that brings to the table how he and his team see the partnership space and what they want to achieve. But it's definitely something that is discussed at the highest level possible. Vikram, something to add? Something I forgot?
So I think you touched upon all the key points here. And Ty, what I would like to underscore is being aligned and not going in there with a win versus lose mindset. Uh, when you're representing a function in those kinds of meetings, you're kind of representing the function in specifically in partnerships, but you're wearing a larger company hat. So I've seen more often than not that partnership people get so obsessed with becoming the voice of the partner that they forget where they're working and what's the North Star.
Yeah, there's something. It's kind of controversial. So Frank Slootman, the CEO of Snowflake, talks about this a lot. He's like a controversial guy in general, but one of the things he talks about is like the if you're on the exec team, like that is your first team, and so you're all a team together, and like you have shared goals, and you're not there representing alliances or partnerships or whatever. You're there representing the exec team, and you're
Exactly.
one team. And then like your alliances team, like obviously like you still have amazing connective tissue and everything with that team, but that's your second team. Like
Yeah.
you're representing the exec team first, and like your function second. And I think like that sounds really kind of controversial to a lot of people, because it almost sounds like elitist, but to your point, like like in practice it works very, very well, because you don't have the marketing person saying, well, like this is my plan and these are my goals, or sales saying like I have to have this. It's like we're on the team together, like we have a unified goal. I love how you get everyone together and like build around that goal. And then no, I was expecting to hear, oh, we have a net retention number, and like these integrations help with that, like the engagement and thus net retention. And it was really cool to hear, hey, actually, we're operating at a much more strategic level than that. Which is really cool. I mean, is that like a framework, Matthias, that you've adopted at the company, or is that something that like you kind of came up with yourselves there?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Um, so first of all, what I do recognize is that it is easy to fall into the trap of the individual team first. Um, in the 7 years, it didn't always go smooth because we ourselves fell into that trap and were defensive about our own team. I think right, we've learned from our mistakes, and I think we're doing much better right now. And I do think it's the same for how we operate right now. We've learned from our mistakes, and I should actually ask Peter, our CEO, but I'm pretty confident it is learning from our mistakes how we did previous quarterly management meetings and how we optimized over the 7 years. And this is where we are right now. I don't think we're using a known framework or a known thing. I think it's build up on like, hey, what did go well last quarter, or this went well, so let's redo that, and what didn't go well, let's replace it. To maybe give one example, this time around we brought in some of our customers or externals that gave us some feedback, and we took that as input for our plans, and we will do that next time around because it was super useful to hear from the US market how they thought about our solution. Some people are intimately involved with our solution, others were more people that knew about the solution because it was somewhere used in their organization, and they gave their honest feedback. It's We were not interested in all the things that went well with our solution because then that's useless. We were interested in like, well, what did you hear that is not so good about our solution, and how can we work on that? That's the interesting bits, right? So we like that, and we're going to do this again next quarter in our management team. So I think we didn't use a standard model. I think it's by trial and error that we came to the management meetings and how they run right now.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we did that a lot at Amplitude, where we would have like our company kickoffs. We would have a customer panel always, and it was always everyone's favorite part of the company kickoffs. And when we would do conferences, we'd have a customer day where we would basically like an advisory council where we would just get feedback from the customers, and it would be very direct. And people would say, we love these things and we can't stand these things, and it would really help the teams get outside of the room a little bit and think about, okay, like what are the problems that we're solving for customers. So I love that you're doing that.
So Tai, I would like to add to that one. So I customer advisory boards, I love them, but ultimately they are already your customer. So it's like sort of, what is it called, survival plane bias.
Yeah, yeah,
You look at the planes that come back and you see the holes, and you're like, well, we need to make these parts better. But you forget that the planes that do not come back, they were shot somewhere else. So probably you
yeah,
need to spend some time. So that's why you bring in people that maybe know about their solution but are maybe not our customer, and hear from them. So I totally get your customer advisory board, and we're somewhat doing that, but more ad hoc. But I also like to hear from people that are specifically not our customer or our competitor, went to a competitor. I would love to hear from them. Yep.
yeah. Yeah, I was on like an investor panel recently, where they had like someone that had left Amplitude, like a customer that had churned, like a bunch of like other data points, and the feedback was amazing because like you got it pretty raw, and you also found out about like, I mean, basically everyone said, hey, the product's amazing. These are some of the like organizational challenges I had trying to get rid of Adobe. Like the person was like, I loved Amplitude, I bought it, and then I couldn't get it in the business because if people were so embedded with Adobe, for instance. And
Yeah.
so you're totally right. There's like so many more data, like listening to customers is amazing. Hopefully listening to partners is also amazing, and then like there's so many other great data points as well. I mean, so like I'd love to hear from you guys. You don't have to name names, but I'd love to hear like about a partnership that you both work on that you feel like is a great one, that's like really working well. And what is it about that partner, what is it about like the way that you're working with them that's just working really well and that you love it? Just like I say, you don't have to name names if you don't want to, but would love to hear more about that.
The good part and the bad part is almost every technical partnership that me and my team work on, Matthias and the product organization has complete visibility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's, I think, a great start. In terms of what's going well, being aligned on what is our outcome, what's the play, what's the long term play, and what's the 5 yard play. If you're aligned on that, then I think most of the partnerships go very well. There are times when it's probably me and my team who would say, well, we need to do something with somebody who's not significant in that space. And then making sure that the rest of the company, specifically the product engineering org and Matthias and his team, are aligned on why are we doing this. It's a little bit of effort, but it's to get the attention of somebody else. So it's those chess moves, if I was to call them those, and making sure that people are completely aware of what these moves are, why you're making these moves, is key.
I'm going to answer that question totally different, Vikram, if you
There
don't
you
mind.
go.
So, the way I interpreted the question different, probably, but the way I would answer that question is like, well, from a marketing perspective, I can call it that way. There's a partnership with another organization where we just have joint customers, and they like talking about that partnership. So it's a it's a good collaboration with that partner. We are not like super deep integrated with them. It's also not shallow. It's just a normal integration. But the customers love it and they like talking about that one. So that's one. But from a marketing perspective, the second one is where with a particular partner we were able to apply to an RFP, and we actually won that one. So we won that one because we were able to jointly like put the pieces together and say, hey, now we have the complete solution. Why we were competing against people that had the complete solution essentially because some of them are platform plays. So these were the two things that immediately came to my mind when I think about good partnerships.
Yeah, and I love that second one. We did that really successfully at Amplitude, where we kind of said, "Hey, look, yeah, there is Salesforce and Adobe and these like big kind of marketing and product and analytics stacks. Also, there's this like what we called the modern growth stack at the time, and it was it was a CDP, it was a product analytics solution, it was a marketing automation tool, and like an attribution analytics tool. And like we would go into these conversations and say, hey, like this is the best stack, and it might not be like in an RFP. Sometimes we would respond to RFPs, but sometimes it would just, like we'd have a deck, and in our slide deck we'd mention like mParticle and Segment and Braze and Iterable and Apps Flyer and Adjust, just be like, look, this is the best in class stack. And then someone gets a presentation from Braze and we're in their deck, and a presentation from Segment and then we're in there. And what you don't get is like Salesforce and Adobe and like all like these kind of legacy platforms. At least like, we've kind of painted them as legacy platforms. And so I totally agree with you where like if you can get that joint solution and it's something that is like also delightful for the customers, and it means you don't have to build like a massive kind of Franken suite, is an awesome thing to be able to kind of do. Like one thing I really want to talk about. I don't. If there's anything more that you guys want to share on that, I'd love to like hear more. Also, and you mentioned a couple of like pretty big partners at the start of the call, and like big partners often take a lot of time to get up to speed, and so then like from all of the executive stakeholders there has to be like a lot of room given like for results and progress and the whole thing, right? And people have to like kind of invest up front. And so you know it sounds like you're doing well with some of the cloud providers, also some other large companies in the space. Vikram, Matthias, like how have you kind of allowed for the time for that?
So that's a very interesting question, and it's also one that a lot of partner leaders struggle with. Um, I would have two tips there for most people. First of all, lay out the long term play and make sure that you repeat that long term play at every opportunity with your peers, with your board, everybody, right? Think, hey, here is the North Star. Here's how we're going to go about this North Star. And here are the phases in how I'm approaching or how we're approaching this problem. And then have tangible measures to show progress against each of those areas. If you're not able to make progress, course correct and change, but lay out what that strategy is upfront and have discrete measures on where you want to be over a period of time, and also break that down into what is it that you can do. I'll give you an example. A very large cloud provider, we've laid out the three phases of what we need to do. And purposefully, I laid it out as a circle because it's iterative. It goes around. You do one, you do the other, you do the third, and then you're back to doing the first. And against the first two, I laid out here's what we're going to do in this month. Here's what I'm going to do in the next quarter. Here's what I'm going to do in the next half. You'll be successful in a few, you'll fail in a few, and that's okay. So my board report every quarter kind of lays that out over and over and over again. So those are the two tips that I would have for most folks on this forum. Matthias, anything that you would want to add?
Nope, you're the expert, my friend.
Like as a recipient, so as an example, like I actually had Justin Forth on the show, who was our partner manager at AWS when we were, and like him and I worked together for a little bit, and then Mariam, who was on my team at Amplitude, kind of ran with that AWS relationship and built it. And I think we still have the AWS, and we're still like slowly making progress on that. And I think there's definitely some frustration internally on like the amount of progress that we've seen with that partnership, and maybe that's like because we're measuring success in the wrong ways, or we have an unrealistic expectation of the speed that we should hit milestones. Like Matthias, I'd love to hear from your standpoint, like again we've called out some like rather large names, and so like what are the types of things that you're expecting to see both from Vikram and his team on like some of the updates and transparency and progress, which is I think awesome, and I'm going to take notes afterwards on doing some of that stuff better, to be honest. But also like progress from the partner and like actually seeing results from the relationship.
It's a hard one, and maybe let's take one step back in the sense that you want to work with larger partners. Somebody once told me, like, hey, always try to work with larger partners than your own organization. Look at your own organization and try to go with larger partners than yourself. So then it's a tricky game, because you know that if you're going to go with a smaller company than yourself, they will be eager to, hang their thing on yours and go with you. So what you're trying to do is you try, as the smaller piece in the party, try to hang your thingy on the bigger one and ride with the bigger one. So it's a natural thing for every organization. So first tip is go with larger partners than yourself. But then it's hard, it's hard. The payoff can be fantastic, but it is non-trivial, because the bigger one is like, well, you know what, in that same logic, why would I work with you? Because you're smaller than me. I cannot, what's the benefit for me? So as the smaller one, you have to show that you're able to do something for them that they're not able to do themselves. And the same is true for these smaller companies that try to work with you. You should probably always say no, except for this one time that where they really can bring value, where you say yes. So it is the same kind of dynamic. So I'm not sure if I really answered your question, but it, I think this is really key to understand why there is slowness in working with these bigger partners, because they will say maybe 99 times no to most of the organizations, but they will say yes to one of them. And trying to be that one yes is super, super hard, and it's a lot of work. So in terms of progress, it's always slower than you expect, um, because you need to take baby steps forward, because they will measure you. And especially if you're like, for us, we're a 200 250 people company. If you try to work with, a thousand people company, or a 10,000 people company, or 100,000 people company, you can see the order of magnitude in difference. So it is super, super hard. So trying to get the attention of a large organization will go slow. That's the thing. Or you have something super unique, and then then other things can happen.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. And I think that's an enlightened perspective. It's like a very high empathy perspective that you have on, like thinking about, oh, well, like if we're trying to work with bigger companies and we're the small company, like, you really understand the whole thing, which I think is a great way. Vikram, it sounds like you're in a great spot with a stakeholder and founder like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, so as we kind of wrap up, the last question we normally ask here is like, what's something that you learned recently, or that you've learned that you'd like to share with people that are listening, something that they could take away? And I'll let whoever's bravest start.
All right, if I may jump in. Uh, One of the things that I'm constantly reminded is to be curious. Um, there are there is a lot that's happening in the industry and in the world in general. If you're curious and if you're reading up and understanding macro trends, it goes a long way in helping the company that you're working in and helping your team that you're managing in seeing the North Star. I'll give you one specific example. A largish partner that we work with, a few years ago, they got acquired by a private equity firm. And reading the tea leaves, we could figure out that the private equity firm is breaking them up into small chunks, uh, preparing for exit of those small chunks. Um, and the person on my team who's working with them, this person was having a hard time trying to figure out why is that the case. And we together then started looking at their websites, and we could see the tea leaves that we were already already reading in terms of where things are going. And that helped us build a lot of empathy around why we were seeing little progress with that specific partner. So curiosity, reading up, I would say, are the two key things that you have to constantly keep reminding yourselves.
Love it.
I'm gonna go back to my survivorship plane bias thingy, and the reason why is, when we started the organization, we focused, all our attention was on our customers and keeping our customers and doing whatever we could to keep our customers. Um, I think we're in this journey now where we need to look a little bit more outside of our customers, and that's interesting. It's a transition. I'll be honest, it's a transition. It's a transition that doesn't not happen overnight, where they're like, well, you know what, maybe we should look at other stuff. By the way, I'm not saying that we're not doing that, but if you're only 10 people, you cannot look at other stuff. You need all your resources to build your product and get your product to market and scale. That word is used quite often. Scale the thing. But I think 5 6 7 years in, you're able to look more like, hey, what are our customers not asking for that we may do or can do? Um, and that is something I've learned recently. And it's not positive or negative. It is just a realization. Like, hey, you know what? There's plenty of other stuff out there, and we became the size that we can actually look into other things and into other areas, and how can we play and how should we play or not play in this area. So that's just a realization for me. That's a natural transition I think organizations go through. But I figured out, like, well, interestingly, that's around the 200 mark that you start to do stuff like that.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, and the story around that bias is amazing. I can't remember where exactly it's from, but it's like Second World War, right? Where they're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, we need to put the more armor on the planes in these places," you know, because this is where they're getting shot or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, yeah, it's really awesome stuff. Well, thank you guys so much for your time. Honestly, I feel like I took a lot of notes, but also I want to re-listen to this straight away. There's some like very tactical things that I can kind of use to do my job better, and I'm sure everyone else is going to feel the same way. So thank you so much for sharing and making yourself available. I really appreciate it.